Hello, everyone. My name is John Corbett. I'm an agricultural climatologist, and I'll be talking today about farming in emerging economies and ag weather intelligence for a changing climate. This is of growing importance because as climate change impacts many aspects of our world, agriculture is a weather-driven industry. Africa, in particular, several hundred million smallholder farmers, and 95% of it is rain-fed. And we'll touch on all these things as I describe this a little bit. I've had 25 years experience in this agricultural climatology. I was a scientist within the CGIAR. Some of you may be aware of this consultative group of international agricultural research. And from there, I went into private industry, first with a very large company and then a seed company, and then went into some entrepreneurial work with this agricultural climatology. So the impact of climate change is upon us. And many of you will have seen in the recent months some of the extreme events that have impacted parts of Africa, and I'm focused on that right now, but smallholder farmers across the tropics. And the weather extremes that people are most concerned with or that make the news oftentimes are flooding. And these tropical storms that came ashore across Madagascar and southern Africa, Zimbabwe saw rainfall events the size of which they've never seen. These have enormous impacts on agriculture because a flood can wash things out. But more insidious than a flood, which is an event of a couple of days or rainfall over a week, are things like droughts, where you just have this very slow collapse of a production system because there's no water. And these things are increasing in both their intensity and their frequency, impacting some of these more marginal areas of the world much greater than the, if you will, the core production areas like the US Great Plains. These other areas that are more marginal are seeing greater extremes. Now, along with this are some concepts of adaptive responses or maladaptive responses. And agriculture is particularly susceptible to maladaptive responses. And let me talk to you a little bit about this. So this quote from a farmer in Kenya is striking because farmers grow things, and if the season is normal, they can produce expected product, expected quality, and expected foodstuffs. But if all of a sudden farmers are faced with a situation where, for too many years in a row, the typical crops, the things they know how to do, plant types don't work, and they start introducing different crops, well, now you have the situation where farmers are not as attuned to the agronomics of the crop. And obviously information becomes even more valuable to a farmer who hasn't grown cassava, doesn't really know about it, doesn't know its vulnerabilities to pests and diseases, and really doesn't even necessarily know how to market it. Yet it is much more drought tolerant. So they're growing it because, in a sense, they hear the highlight, drought tolerant, but they don't necessarily know all the nuances of how to produce it well. So this is really dangerous ground. Maladaptive practices might just be where you tell someone, we'll grow millet, not maize, because it's more drought tolerant. Well, they may not know how to grow the millet, nor may they know how to even process it once they harvest it. And it may not be something they want to eat. So it is a complicated situation when the weather changes. So Digital Climate Advisory Services, DCAS, is a method of digital extension. It's a method of getting information very specific to that location, literally the farm, literally the soil even. It could be the crop specificity. It's almost necessary, such that the farmer is being given suggestions, given tips and tricks to produce more. And SSPs is just an acronym for small scale producers. So what you have is the classic case where a weather forecast is actually not very valuable to a farmer if it's general, because the only thing a farmer actually cares about is their plot of land, their hectare or 2 or 3 hectares. That's it, because it doesn't really matter if it's raining 30 or 40 kilometers away. It doesn't matter, and it's really important to get localized. So when we talk about digital climate advisory services, what we're talking about are inputs about the location of the farm, the planting date, the crop variety, the soil type, all of these things data science can handle. And the interview with the smallholder farmer, the text message you send to ask, what are you growing or when did you plant, or you can predict that, is then processed by the data science piece, the huge algorithms that produce a forecast or agronomic pest and disease models, and they're pretty good. And at the end of this, what you have is the ability to disseminate this information by phone and penetration of cell phones now and most of the earth is pretty well complete. The point is the data-driven agronomy is far more specific, and of course it scales. And these are the characteristics of digital climate advisory services that are so valuable. So let me give you a visual on what we really mean by this. So here you have this agricultural landscape, you have a farm, and the data science can say, yeah, we know when it rained, we know what the forecast is, we know how the temperatures have been, so we can model what growth stage the plant is in or when to plant. Then there's all these questions that might be associated with, in this case, we get for our story, a variety or a type of crop that maybe the farmer's not as experienced with. Or conversely, it's what they're experienced with, but the growing season has so shifted because climate change has impacted actually when the rains start. And this information is really important. So you process the information in the cloud, in the company, in the background, and you send a text message that says, hey, it looks like it's time to plant. All signals are go. And that actually is really important because in the tropics, the soils are already warm, there's already pests in the soil. And if you put your seed in and it doesn't germinate right away, you're going to start losing yield potential really very rapidly, like 20 and 30% within 2 weeks, just because of damage to the seed. So the flip side to this is that the in-season advisories can also be calculating in the background kind of an ROI, where you get a return of investment for the fertilizer purchase. And again, this can actually, and as a collection, go to an input provider such that they know which farmers are getting the rains, which plants are, which crop type they're growing, and which fertilizer types they need. And they can, if you will, send out advertisement messages, kind of say, hey, we're going to come into the village on Saturday morning and we'll do a discount because we can send a bulk truck size to the village as opposed to the typical 1 and 2 kilo packages. And this is really important. So you do all this for one farm, and you have to realize, wait a minute, if you can do it for one farm, well, you can do it for all the farms, because what you have is a scalable architecture that says the farm has this crop planted on this day, and the messages are then goes through what we call a decision tree, which is crop specific, and it can send the farmer messages that are actually quite tuned to what they're seeing in the field. Now, from how to go to scale side, there is a lot of evidence that digital climate advisory services work. Now, there's a portfolio of things you could do. You could offer things like, agricultural services offer things like insurance or things to do with the farm gate, like the production quality scoring, so they get a higher price. There's all kinds of other things you can do, but DCAS by itself can be kind of standalone. It's one of the few that is something that is obvious. It can be bolted on to existing projects in the developing world a lot. And what you see are the opportunities for entrepreneurs. And so typically, you have to have someone on the ground to collect the information from the smallholder farmer, their mobile number, where they are, and of course, all those things, GPS, things like that are quite easy to get. But look at the size of the returns. The ROI for DCAS is actually GDP changing. If your country has 1 million hectares and you can boost productivity just 10%, and a hectare normally produces, a minimum, but normally $700 to $1,500 per hectare in profitable work, And you boost that 10%. Well, you do that for 1 million hectares. If it's $700, that's $70 per hectare times 1 million. Well, that's a lot of value that you're bringing by doing something that is not terribly expensive to get going. We're talking on the order of $1 per farmer per crop per season. And what I mean by that dollar is that's like the farmer or the input provider could pay that for a service to boost the productivity and the quality. So when you put all this together in the context of climate change and agricultural climatology and the trends, it's a really complex system in the tropics. In many areas, not only was it traditionally variable, it's more variable. Small-scale producers, they're rain-fed, so you have to time things with the rains, and that variability is causing enormous economic challenges. Both the interannual and during the season rainfall variability is increasing, and so that's the bane of rain-fed agriculture, guys. Variability. If you live in a semi-arid area and you expect to get kind of a minimal amount of rain, and it comes as a minimal amount of rain about the normal time, you're still fine because you're adapted to it. Your agronomics, your seedling spacing is wider, your rows are wider, and you're managing the water. But in the same place, if the rains don't arrive for 6 weeks, they're 6 weeks late, you've been thrown into just confusion. And then one thing to keep in mind about a warmer atmosphere, especially with higher humidity, is that this is going to facilitate intense and more foliar diseases. And we believe that digital climate advisory services are part of a bigger scheme, but this information, localized and in-time information, is one of the keys to avoid maladaptation and to help adapt. So it is a key to adaptive response. Thank you very much for your time and this opportunity to speak to you today. Hope you all have a great conference. Bye-bye.